Jesus restores a demon-possessed man. As they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee, when Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go to the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. The man from whom the demons had gone begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over the town how much Jesus had done for him. Amen.
Thank you. The title of this morning's sermon is At the Feet of Jesus. And it's more than a title, actually. It's a position, it's a location, it's a perspective, it's an angle, it's a positioning of the heart at the feet of Jesus. When were you last at the feet of Jesus in prayer? Or at the feet of Jesus to learn? Or at the feet of Jesus because you hit rock bottom and you had nowhere to go and you needed help? The invitation this morning is to imagine ourselves at the feet of Jesus and enter into today's story from that angle. And there are a few reasons why we might want to do that. Firstly, because this is the season in the church calendar, following Easter, the Ascension, Pentecost, where it's a good time to reflect on what we sometimes call the lordship of Jesus Christ. There is, of course, a time to reflect on Jesus' meekness and humility and service. And there is a time to reflect on his authority and power and glory that the resurrection and ascension and Pentecost point to. There's a time to remind ourselves that Jesus washed his disciples' feet. And there is a time to remind ourselves that they worshipped at the feet of the risen Lord. And the second reason I invite you to adopt this position of the heart at the feet of Jesus is because this is how people in our story approached Jesus. We find the demon-possessed man fell at Jesus' feet. He begs Jesus. The demons beg Jesus. Then when the demons leave the man, he sits at Jesus' feet. Then all the people in the region beg Jesus to leave. And then the man begs Jesus to follow him, to travel with him. So we find a whole lot of activity at Jesus' feet in this story and a whole lot of begging. And if we condense it all down, we find that this story has a kind of rhythm. At Jesus' feet, begging, then someone else begging, and then it repeats. At Jesus' feet, begging, then someone else begging. And not only is there a rhythm here, it's part of a movement in Luke's gospel. This story comes right after Jesus calming the storm, and the two episodes are linked. In both, Jesus is the authoritative Lord of all creation, even long before his resurrection. And so Luke is inviting readers, listeners, that's us too, to humble ourselves with the people of those stories and fall at the feet of Jesus. So, who is this man? The main character of our story today. He's from a region of the Gerasenes. This is a majority Gentile, non-Jewish area, hence the keeping of pigs, animals that Jews considered unclean. This area that he's from, it's like the far-off land that the prodigal son went to. There's that story of the prodigal son that took his father's inheritance and went off into a far-off land and squandered the money, and he ended up getting hungry, so hungry that he wanted to eat the food of the pigs there. So there were pigs there as well, this far-off land. He ends up turning back and going back to the father and is welcomed back like a true son. And just like the prodigal son in the far-off land, who decides he's reached rock bottom when he's about to eat the pig food, in the same way, this man in our story, he's reached rock bottom. He's hit rock bottom. We're told that he is demon-possessed. And it's easy to get hung up on that description. It can distract us and alienate us from the story. It could be a stumbling block for us because demon possession in our culture is a category we rarely, if ever, use except for in the horror genre, in cinemas and in books. And so we might stumble on this, but please, let's not get hung up. Let's just consider this man's symptoms and try to understand his condition. And I wonder, do you have any empathy for this man? This is what's going on for him. We read that for a long time the man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but lived in the tombs. And despite his community's attempts to bind him, chain him, he often broke those restraints and fled to solitary places. So let's just pause there. Two significant aspects to his condition. He's struggling to look after himself with clothing and shelter. And he's socially isolated on the margins of his community. He lives in the tombs. He hangs out with dead people, not the living. He is not well at all. The only way his community can understand, he can understand his behaviour is in terms of demon possession. At least that way the man can continue to be treated with compassion in the community, not blamed. He's not choosing to live like this. I'm sure his community would have said, he's not choosing this. So it's in this state that the man falls at the feet of Jesus and pleads with him. And yet it's a bit more complicated than that, because when the man opens his mouth, the words are not exactly his. For example, Jesus asks him, "What is your name?" And the man replies, "Legion," which is obviously not his name. We're told that this is the name given because many demons had gone into him. But see what you think as you hear this next bit. Is there more to that name Legion than meets the eye or meets the ear? At this time, in the land of Palestine, it was held forcefully by 4 Roman legions. And a legion was a division of the Roman army consisting of 6,000 soldiers together with auxiliary troops. If this man was from the town of Gerasa, which he may well have been because that was in this area that it talks about in the Gospel, he might have experienced significant brutality from a Roman legion. Or perhaps, I haven't seen this in any commentaries, but perhaps he himself was a soldier that had brutally massacred people. Either way, whether he experienced the brutality of a Roman legion or was part of it, I think it's really significant that the man gives legion as his name. It's almost like the historical brutality of the Romans has gone into him and is locked up in him, possessed by that evil. And here's a crucial thing to note about his condition. He can no longer differentiate between his personality and the trauma he experienced or he initiated. He doesn't have pain. He thinks he is his pain. He is legion. And all of this shows that he's stuck. He is stuck in the past with the trauma. And we know that because he hangs out with the dead in the tombs. He lives with the dead. Perhaps they were his friends and he can't get over the loss. Or perhaps they were his victims and he can't get over the guilt of what he did to them. Either way, he's more at home with the dead and in the past than the living and the present. Perhaps, and I just offer this, perhaps this man had what today we call complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a condition caused by repeated experiences of trauma. It can lead someone to feel shame or guilt, isolate themselves and not look after themselves very well. It also can lead to some people behaving very erratically and a lot of risky behaviour as well. For me, I think the way he gives his name as Legion reinforces that line of thinking. I wonder if he is struggling to dissociate his personality from the trauma caused by a legion in his land. And so, in an extraordinary way, Jesus' question, "What is your name?" that question forces this man to name his pain. The pain of the past that is still causing havoc in his life. At the feet of Jesus, the man names his pain, and that is the first step toward healing for him. We'll get back to the story, but let's just turn the spotlight on us for a moment. What about us? It's unlikely that any of us will be experiencing the range of issues that the man in the story experiences. But I think it's very common, because I've seen it, it's very common for the pain of a person's past to interfere with their present from time to time, and to varying degrees. Sometimes it's really serious, sometimes it's just really minor. Sometimes the pain of the past will cause us to act out in chaotic and unhealthy ways in the present. Sometimes it will mess with our ability to look after ourselves. Sometimes it will cause us to isolate ourselves and flee from a community because of guilt or shame or real or perceived stigma. Sometimes it will cause us to get stuck and unable to move on. Sometimes it will mean we stay with the memories instead of move into present day realities. Live with the dead rather than the living. Hopefully we don't all experience this at once like the man in the story, but this is life. And if we feel the past interfering with the present, you're not abnormal. This is really common, but it's to varying degrees. Past pain can mess with present-day life, and it's really, really tough. You hurt someone, someone hurt you. You betrayed someone, someone betrayed you. Someone didn't talk to you for years, you didn't talk to them. You took advantage of someone, someone took advantage of you. You lied to someone, someone lied to you. You left someone out, someone left you out. You misused your power, someone misused theirs. The invitation for us today, just like the man in our story, is to name our pain. At the feet of Jesus, name our pain. I think we all need to do this. We especially need to do this if we've begun to identify really closely with our past pain or trauma. And when that happens, it's like our personality is occupied by legion or school bullies or that assault or that injustice. And I know that this can all sound really abstract. I'm not giving illustrations for good reason, because they're so personal. This is very abstract, but this is as real as it gets. I have seen people possessed by their pain, by their trauma. Sometimes you see it in their eyes, because they go somewhere and they go through the memory. You can see they're tapping into those memories and they go somewhere. I've seen people who have struggled to heal and the pain continues to interfere with their life. The way out, always, is to name the pain, to get to the root, to say out loud something like, I think my name is Legion, because Legion has screwed up my life and I feel like everything has been tainted by Legion. That's a really hard thing to do. And we don't always know where to begin. Our story gives us a great place to start. We can humble ourselves at the feet of Jesus and name the pain. That's what we're invited actually to do at communion. We often pray a prayer at communion. Almighty God, to whom all hearts are open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hidden, cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of your Holy Spirit. That's an opening up. That's a saying, God, see this. See this. You can name the pain right there at communion. Let's get back to the story. So the man named his pain as Legion. Then we hear Legion speaking again, begging Jesus to let the demons or the past pain to go into the pigs. And I realise this sounds very strange. And you're probably thinking, poor pigs. Me too. But Jesus doesn't really do this, but allows this. And the poor pigs rush down the steep bank into the lake and drown. And it's really hard to see this terrible loss of livestock as good news. And the result was actually that the locals, they start begging Jesus to leave. He's messing with their farming economy. They need him out of town. They're not very happy with him. But there is good news. If you have eyes to see the symbolism here, there's good news. Because part of the problem, as we've seen for the man, was that he didn't think he had pain, he thought he was his pain. He spoke as Legion, the military unit that caused devastation in his land. So it's significant that Jesus enables Legion to go out of the man and into the pigs. If Legion is in the pigs, the man and Legion are separate. He is not his pain. He has a whole life of his own to live. He has a future. Jesus, as it were, resurrected this man's personality. Those are the words of John Swinton, the theologian. He says that Jesus went around and with his healings and restoration of people, he resurrected their personality. They became more themselves after an encounter with Jesus, not less. And another thing regarding the symbolism here, the drowning of the pigs pointed back to an event in the Old Testament, the Exodus. When the people of Israel were slaves in Egypt, God heard their cry. Some of you will know this story, some of you won't. God heard their cry. God said, let my people go. And God delivered them out of Egypt. Some of you might remember that the story doesn't end there, because then the Egyptian soldiers pursue the Israelites to bring them back to slavery, past pain, pursuing. And then there was this miraculous moment when the Israelites went through the Red Sea on dry land, but the waters swept over the Egyptian pursuers. You can see the links. I'm sure you can see the links. The man in our story is being pursued by past pain, who he calls Legion, the name of a military unit. And this man is liberated from his past pain when he sees it drowned in the water. It's just like when the Israelites looked back and saw their Egyptian oppressors drowned in the Red Sea. They knew then that they had closure. The past pain could no longer pursue them. And that was the case for the man too. We read that his community found him sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. He needed to see his past pain separated from his personality and then symbolically drowned. You might see the links between this and baptism too. Often baptism by immersion can help us realise that we are no longer bound by the power of sin or the sins done to us. It has been drowned in the water, and we are free to enter into a new life under the lordship of Jesus Christ. Like the man, we too can sit at Jesus' feet dressed and in our right mind. That's not where the story ends. There's one final interesting aspect about the story, because the man, he asks to travel with Jesus as Jesus' disciple. And you'd think Jesus would say, brilliant, yes, come with me, travel with me. The more the merrier, more disciples, more. But Jesus says, no, don't travel with me as my disciple. Jesus says, return home and tell how much God has done for you. And I think Jesus is very wise here, because part of the man's problem was that his condition had led to social isolation, and so part of his healing required him to be restored to his community, to witness to God's grace in community. Recovery for this man meant opening his life up to a community and sharing what had changed for him. And so there were 3 parts to his healing. It started at the feet of Jesus when he named his pain. Then something clicked when he saw his past pain separated from his personality and drowned in the water. But then healing continued and reached its completion as he opened himself up to others in his community. This story reminds me of a quote by Bell Hooks. She was an author and social activist. She died just last year. Rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion. And when Bell Hooks writes about healing as an act of communion, she's not thinking of communion as bread and wine explicitly. She's more thinking about intimacy and fellowship and sharing between people and God. But of course, in a church setting, Holy Communion is all part of that. But here's the quote in its context. The millions of people who attend AA meetings seek a place of recovery and find that the affirming community that surrounds them creates an environment of healing. This community offers to individuals, some for the first time ever in their lives, a taste of that acceptance, care, knowledge and responsibility that is love in action. Rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion. Most of us find that space of healing communion with like-minded souls. Other individuals recover themselves in their communion with the divine Spirit, God. And then she goes on to talk about prayer and quotes St. Teresa of Avila. The big idea, though, with this is that healing, recovery, liberation from past pain happens in communion with others and communion with God. We don't heal well alone. We need to be honest with God, ourselves, and others in order to heal. We need to give and receive love in order to heal. And there's lots of different ways this can happen. It can happen through one-to-one relationships with wise friends or a partner or spiritual directors or ministers or mentors or counsellors, always depending on how much the past pain is causing havoc in present-day life. One of these might be more appropriate than others, and if you're not sure where to start, you can always have a conversation with Mike or me. It can happen in groups too. Life groups at church, or specific support groups, or recovery groups, or just groups of kind friends where there is good listening and good empathy. And that's something that we can all be part of, providing that kind of context for people. Are you a good listener? How is empathy? How are you practicing empathy in your life right now? It can happen through certain Christian practices like prayer or baptism or communion or confession, which doesn't require a priest necessarily. Giving testimony when it is appropriate to do so. A note of caution here. I once heard someone who gave testimony in the middle of a worship service all about his past pain, and it was really inappropriate, and actually I think he really regretted it because it just was not the right context. Actually, if it's really difficult stuff that you really need to work through and you haven't processed yourself yet, please, with one person or 2 or 3 people that are trusted and can travel with you, can journey with you over time, over weeks, the months, the years. But sometimes, like at someone's baptism, the testimony, it can be a key part of the healing if the person has worked through enough and God has been already at work in that. Where did I get to? So these 3 areas, one-to-one, groups, and also Christian practices. And you might be thinking, well, where does At the Feet of Jesus come into all of this? Well, it's the whole lot. This can be the attitude that you come to every single one of those, if you like. It can be the entry point, the disposition we bring to those things. If the man in our story is anything to go by, healing from past pain can begin at the feet of Jesus and completed in communion, intimacy, fellowship with others. So just some quick questions for us, because we need to go to the communion table. Quick questions for us. Will each of us help Worthing Baptist Church, if this is your church, or if not, then your church, will you help Worthing Baptist Church to be a community where people find healing? Will we listen well? Will we practice empathy? Will we grow in empathy? Will we ask God to grow that in us? Will each of us commit to the work of transforming our pain rather than transmitting it? You heard of that phrase? Hurt people, hurt people? It doesn't have to be that way. If we go through this process of transformation with God, transform our pain rather than transmit it. And finally, will we tell how much God has done for us in community? That was right at the end of our story. That was Jesus' final message to the man. Will you tell how much God has done for you in community?